call the meeting to order. Off with a roll call, James.
Good morning. I'll read the roll. Please let us know if you're here. Commissioner Carl Baxmeyer.
Here.
Councilman Jesse Bohannon.
Here.
Commissioner Mike Burrows. District Deputy Commissioner Matt Deitchley.
Here.
Councilman Dwight Fish.
Here.
Councilman Doug Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Carrie Groninger.
Here.
Councilwoman Kathy Groninger.
Here.
Mayor Jeff Gross. Mayor Phil Jenkins.
Here.
District Deputy Commissioner Todd Johnson. Councilman Kenneth Lee.
Here with bells on.
Mayor Robert Listenberger.
Here.
Mayor James Mueller. Mayor Rod Robertson.
Here.
Councilman Brian Tanner.
Here.
Councilman Tony Violi.
Here.
Commissioner Mayor David Wood.
Yes, sir.
We have a quorum of members present. We'll be only voting in person though today.
Okay, great. So next on our agenda is our November meetings, our November minutes. If you could please take a look at those, and if no changes, please motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, next on our agenda is reports. Chairman, I have none today, so.
You do have
I
a
do.
minor one,
So I'm
and
gonna nominate committee.
I will happily cover it for you. So we are at the end of the calendar year. The MACOG executive board, the officers, they serve until the end of the January meeting. But we will need a nominating committee to select our officers for next year. We usually ask that we have a nominating committee of about 3 to 5 individuals who are volunteers that can help with that. The typical transition that MACOG has historically used is that each of the members are asked on the executive committee to move up 1 seat. So if they're first vice chair, they become chair, et cetera. And so we would plan to do that, but we usually have at least 1 position that needs to be filled. And so we would be needing any volunteers for the nominating committee to help with the selection of those board officers for next calendar year.
I'll volunteer.
It is a very, what I would say, because of that transition and that historic kind of movement, it is usually a pretty light requirement of your time. It involves usually me having some conversations with all of those existing officers to make sure they're willing to serve and move up. And then usually there's a conversation, like 1 meeting of this nominating committee that happens prior to the January meeting to kind of finalize details. So it is not a large time commitment. Just so you're aware.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd be happy to help. I'll do that as well.
Thank you all for your volunteerism.
Next we have is our financial report, Debbie. Good morning.
Good morning. You should all have the October 2024 financial report. A couple of things to note for this month. If you notice on the balance sheet, we have accounts payable in a very large amount. That's due to us getting in 2 buses at the very end of October. So like 1.7 million of that amount was for 2 buses, which we then paid for in November. Our expenses fiscal year to date through the end of October was a little over $4 million, and 30% of our annual budget. And you'll see that line item of rolling stock and vehicles where those 2 buses were there in that month. Our cash balance at the end of October was 1.4 million. And our cash disbursements for the month of October was $670,112. Are there any questions or anything? If not,
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the financial report. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Debbie. Next is secretary. Rod, do you have any?
You see the November modifications in your packet.
Thank you.
And you also have a meeting schedule for 2025 for this board in this February. It does say Mishawaka City Hall for the location all throughout the year. I'm not quite sure if you'd like to change that to Dave's Palace. No?
It all depends on the Elkhart Grand Prix.
Our trophy case?
One item I do want to point out for your 2025 meeting schedule, obviously still the second Wednesday of the month, still 10 a.m. No changes there. I will note that the February 12th meeting most likely will be canceled because that does overlap with the trip that some of the officers take with me out to Washington, D.C. For a conference, and also to be able to talk with folks on the Hill to be able to understand what is going on in Washington. And so please note that February 12th, while it's on this schedule, it's presumed most likely to be canceled.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not quite sure. I think that we've made adjustments when AIM has had their idea summit.
Yes.
Not quite sure if
When is that?
That is a modification as well.
Usually the first week in October.
October.
About then. They have to go.
Our
they moved
new
it back.
president is pulling it up as we speak.
I saw the plaque
Did
downstairs.
you see that?
Yeah.
We're in outer, rare air.
Big time here in
We're
Mishawaka.
rare air. Rare air.
It is the September 11th. So it's 10th, 11th, and 12th.
All right. So we'll look at how that affects the September meeting as well. Great point. Thank you.
Okay, how about old business? Anything there, James?
There's no old business today.
Okay, we're starting with our new business. First on our list is Caitlin. Hope you got quite a list of projects here.
Yes, good morning. We have a little bit of a longer list of amendments, but kind of I will be efficient going through these. So up first, for Transportation Resolution 31-24, we have NDOT initiated projects. Items A and B are in the same corridor along US 6 from the State Route 106 junction to Shawnee Drive outside of Napanee. Item A is moving construction into fiscal year 26 and increasing construction federal funding by 1.7 million. And that's specifically for the HMA overlay along that corridor. And then item B is for the shoulder rehabilitation along that corridor with similar termini. And we are increasing construction, federal funding for construction for 4.3 million in federal. Item C is also along the US 30 corridor, and this is in the western part of Marshall County, ending at Union Road on US 30. The action is increasing federal funding by 4.1 million. And then moving into St. Joseph County, we have item D. This is a new project that we're adding to our transportation improvement program. Currently for this tip, we're just adding in preliminary engineering and right-of-way. This is for State Route 2 at Quince. Its work type is other intersection improvement, which is currently being planned as a reduced conflict intersection. However, with the programming of preliminary engineering, a final preferred alternative will be identified with stakeholders and public involvement. Construction is planned for this project in fiscal year 29.
I'd just like to add that fully supportive of that addition. State Road 2 in Quince has seen a number of fatalities and significant accidents. I know the Michigan J-turn, as we refer to it so often, isn't the most popular in the world, but that's one alternative that's being considered. And we're not going to, speaking for St. Joe County, we're not going to get another interchange there when one is going in at State Road 2 in Larison. The stoplight is ineffective, so hopefully that project can move forward.
Yeah, for what it's worth, just to jump in on that too, obviously folks who have driven through there frequently, I drive through there twice a day, every day. We've, over the years, added several different safety measures to try to lower the incidents out there that has happened, but still not quite enough yet. Just to be clear though, this is by no means set as a reduced conflict intersection. It's just one of several options we're looking at. It seems like it would be the most effective, but more to come on that. There'll be a public involvement as well.
Good.
And that was, you're specifically talking about state road 2, correct?
Yeah, 2 at Wentz.
And to the commissioner's point, it definitely shows up on our high injury network from all of our crash analysis for fatal and incapacitating crashes. So happy to see, a project being looked at for that location because it's definitely high on the radar for safety.
All right, also in St. Joseph County, we're adding in a project for an HMA overlay on US 31 from the north junction of US 20 to the bridge over I-80 90. And we're currently just adding in preliminary engineering into our TIP, but construction will be programmed in fiscal year 29. Item F is also adding in construction along the US 6 corridor from the junction of US 35 to State Route 104 near Walkerton. Item G is also adding in a project along an HMA overlay project along State Route 933 from Sample Street to Angelo Boulevard. And item H is increasing federal funding by 1.9 million in construction and adding the right-of-way phase into our TIP, and that's for State Route 933 from Ash Road to Bittersweet Road.
Okay.
That concludes the NDOT initiated projects, but I think under the same resolution, we have also some locally initiated projects. These were added in about 2 weeks ago. NDOT had announced project awards for their local safety projects. And so our region was fortunate to have 5 projects selected in that call for about 1.5 million. Because of the time frame and wanting to get these projects up and going, we added these in quickly so it can keep the administrative side rolling. You'll see a lot of RFPs go out for these projects hopefully in the next week or so they can get a PE underway for this fiscal year. For the first item, we have 2 in Kosciuszko County, items A and J. Item I is adding in countywide sign replacement, and item J is funding for their second phase of countywide striping. Item K is for the city of Warsaw. They're looking at about 12 different intersections to upgrade their signals. Item L is for the town of Osceola. They're looking at 2 locations along Beach Road to install flashers. And then the last one is Marshall County. They're also going to be working on countywide striping initiative. And I think that gets through all of the amendments for this month. I'm happy to answer any questions, but if there are none, I would ask for your approval of resolution 31-24.
I have a question for clarification. Was preform plastic?
I think that's just the
Like thermoplastic?
striping material,
Oh,
like paint.
okay.
Yeah.
Motion approved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Not all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Caitlin. Looks like you got some more here, resolution 32-24.
Yeah, for resolution 32-24, the resolution to support the calendar year 25 safety performance measure targets for the state of Indiana. We bring these to the policy board every year. They're based on 5-year rolling averages, but essentially a performance target for meeting a series of safety initiatives. And so I can kind of go through some of these quickly. For number of fatalities, here's just a previous example of the wipeouts are annual data the green or the blue lines are 5-year averages, and then the little triangles, this might be a little bit hard to see, are the targets that have been set across the state. And so for calendar year 25, the number of fatalities target is set at 8.12 or 812 fatalities. And that rate per 100 miles of VMT equates to 1.009. For the number of serious injuries, that target has been identified to set at 3,031.9. And then that rate of serious injuries per 100 million VMT is at 3.402. And then for the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, that target has been set at 363.4. So you notice across all of these targets, I believe it was a 2% reduction from previous years' targets. And James, if you want to fill in anything, feel free.
Yeah, so just to recap, this is with the infrastructure law. Previously, they implemented performance measures. There's a series of performance measures related to safety, related to asset management, related to a whole host of different areas. These are largely typically performance measures for state DOTs. We have the option to create our own, but there is no incentive or punishment if we created our own and got it right or got it wrong. It is additional staff time, admin to do that. And so historically what we have done is collaborated with the state, worked through the process of understanding their data, how they're coming up with those numbers. And then we historically have always then supported the state target. And that's what we're recommending here, is that we are in agreement with the state of their methodology and how they came up with this, and that we would be supportive of their state targets. If the state does not hit their targets for, say, safety, they then have a set aside of some of their more flexible funding that has to be then focused and targeted on safety. So FYI, there's no impact directly to MACOG's funding or what MACOG would fund, but we tend to program projects that do focus on safety. So from the federal performance measure, that's what we've historically done. This is done annually. And so we'd be asking you to support those state targets. We still are doing a lot of work on understanding all of our regional safety data. That's why we're doing the regional safety action plan and looking more on a deep dive into what's happening in our region. But from the federal performance measure side of things, we would encourage the supporting of the state target.
How do our trend lines relate to statewide? I mean, are we tracking along the same line, or, I mean, it'd be interesting to see an overlay if it was available.
Yeah, I think we could provide data to that at
Are we
a
driving the
subsequent
higher
meeting.
number or higher or lower, you know?
Yeah, typically I would say we're moving with the state, but I would have to look at it specifically.
Just curious.
Yeah. That's great. Great point.
Can we, as the state gets the data that they're measuring their results against, can we see where, you know, whether it's some kind of graph with our dots to see where our worst intersections are not in our region? And it's not a blame game. It's obviously a focus game, right?
Yes.
Safety one way or another.
So later today, we have our next meeting of our SS4A Regional Safety Task Force, right? And we're doing exactly that. And you'll be getting that information at a subsequent meeting. It was too jam-packed today to do it. But yes, we can tell you that in each county, I don't have the number memorized at this point, but 70% of crashes happen on 4% of roads. And here are the roads where they tend to happen. right?
And then do we see after we do a road project for safety,
Sure.
a direct impact on a decrease in that number of accidents would be wonderful.
We can look at that.
Motion to approve resolution 3224.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, resolution 33-24. Jane?
Yes, resolution 3324. Most of our transit staff couldn't be here today. They're down in Winnemac to see the Brownability facility, which is where we get our ADA paratransit vehicles from. And so you'll have me present this item. But 3324 is the MACOG Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. This is a required plan under with our friends at Federal Transit Administration. This is updated and it looks at essentially safety and safety performance measures on the public transit system. Not a lot of major overhaul or changes to this document for this go around. The biggest item is that there was a required new section, which adds Appendix J to the document, which is in relation to General Directive 24.1. And I know you've all looked at FTA's General Directive 24.1, but if you haven't, that is a required action regarding information about assaults that may happen to transit workers. And what is our process and how we would handle that. And so there has to be specific language to that. So that is added in. Other than that, there are minor tweaks, changes, typographical changes, those kind of things. We'd be asking for your approval of the approve and certify the updates to the MACOG PT ASP.
So moved.
Sorry.
We got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Other items, James?
Yes. Also, wanted to report that this year was a year for various audits. And audits is probably not the right word. Certification process reviews. Not only do we have our normal annual State Board of Accounts for MACOG, we had our normal State Board of Accounts audit for the River Basin and the State Board of Accounts audit with the RDA because we do the accounting there. So we had those 3 audits, but then we had our certification review with Federal Highway. You'll hear more about that in the January meeting. That's the process review with our friends at Federal Highway. And we had our triennial review with the Federal Transit Administration. That is a process review of all things transit that we do with the interurban trolley system. There are over 600 different elements that you can get finding a corrective action, a write-up for. I am pleased to report in the final review and report that we received 0 findings. We had 0 corrective actions. So it's a great testament to our transit team, to our accounting team, and everyone who really supports delivering that service. Our federal friends found no deficiencies within the program, and it's a very large program. This is over a 3-year time period. It's a lot of data and I's to dot and P's to cross. And I'm very pleased with the time that our team spent in preparation for that, but also just the continuous work that they do on a daily basis to make sure that we're following all of those rules. So wanted to make you aware of that final report. From a legal side of things, we may need to adopt the findings of that report. No, this is just presentational. All right. This is just presentational. I wasn't sure. We always have to accept the findings of the State Board of Accounts audit. So this only happens every 3 years. So my memory doesn't always serve me well. But wanting to make sure that you're aware that for that time period, we had a perfect score, if you will.
Congratulations.
Great job, MACOG team. Okay. Sit on that, right? So we're ready for a presentation. So regional housing study.
Yes. We have Jeff with Community Scale, who is online. He'll be running us through the presentation. Just a little bit of context and level setting. You all should be familiar, but in case you are not, MACOG worked with our community foundations in St. Joe, Elkhart, and Marshall County. We were invited to apply for a planning grant with the Lilly Foundation. And it was to look at a regional challenge, something that you all on your local levels have been working through, has been trying to figure out the challenges related to housing. Why are there challenges? What has caused those challenges? How much do we need? What kind do we need? All of those kind of things. And so we wanted to be able to work with those foundations and work with all of you to gather a lot of data related to this topic and really be able to take a deep dive look at what those challenges are. I'm just going to walk you through some of the key findings, but you can also always find out more information online on our website. And you'll recall that we have an application pending. We'll find out shortly how that application fared with the Lilly Foundation. And that application is for $20 million from the foundation to work on topics related to housing, land bank, regional housing, investment or infrastructure fund, and a few other elements. So we'll have more information as those announcements are made. But as we wait for that, wanted to bring you kind of the key findings of the study. And so I'll turn it over to Jeff with Community Scale, who's been a great partner in helping us look at this.
Thank you, James, and good morning, everyone. And I have my colleagues, Nels Nelson and Sarah Brett McCoy, on the line too. So I'll spend 10 minutes or so running through these findings. And then if there's time, we can answer some questions after that. So James set the stage a little bit, and some of you maybe have been involved in the process or seen some of the results as they've come out. But in general, the three main goals here are to establish a regional platform for housing planning and policy making, provide resources and technical assistance to help communities at different scales navigate these challenges, and convene a dialogue, foster collaboration between leaders, municipalities, folks like yourself, and then at finer grain levels down on the ground in the communities to start moving the needle on these issues across the 3-county region. So to start, just a quick overview of how we went about this and what sorts of findings we had. So one of the key questions is, how much housing do we need today in the region? And so we start by trying to quantify a total demand for housing. And that takes into account a number of factors such as projected growth, keeping the housing stock fresh and removing obsolete and vacant housing, and then accommodating, providing more affordable options for people experiencing cost burden, people having a hard time finding affordable housing. So all that rolls into a total housing demand that just represents the total need across the population. We then establish a production target because we need to take that big number and channel it into something we can work with. So we think in a 10-year planning horizon, how many units should we plan to build? What's realistic? What's aggressive but achievable? And what does that housing mix need to look like in terms of price points, in terms of typologies? Where are the gaps and how can we fill them? And we break that down in some detail, which you can see in the full report. And then we develop some strategies to help start making progress, especially at the regional level, towards that production target. So just some basic questions, and some of this is material we've shared with other people, working with lay audiences for whom this might be new, but is of course important. One of the key questions, what does attainable mean? So we're thinking about attainable housing, which is another word for affordable in many ways, as a unit that costs no more than 30% of a household's monthly income. And this is relevant in all income levels. We're not just talking about deep affordability. People can be challenged to find housing that they can afford at all income levels. So the first step is to just take a step back and understand what that landscape looks like. Where are the areas of cost burden? Where are the areas of need? Where is there a mismatch between what people can afford and what's available across the region? What's driving this crisis? We dig into this too in the process in the report. There's a number of things. Development costs, of course, financing costs are going up, continue to go up. In many of the communities across the region, infrastructure is really at its limit. Either to build new housing, you need to extend expensive infrastructure, or we're working within an urban context where the infrastructure is old and needs to be upgraded or replaced to accommodate new development. The construction industry is experiencing a labor shortage. There's a lot of political issues around housing. Everyone has an opinion. It does impact everyone, so there can be resistance to change. And then the regulatory environment, the regulatory context isn't always in sync with what developers need to do what they need to do. That can slow things down and create friction as well. So our strategies and strategy toolkit will address some of those issues. How many units do we need? If you go into the dashboard, you can see some of these data points broken down county by county. For this presentation, we're just talking regionally. But we think the region should plan for about 13,000 to 16 or 17,000 units over the next decade. And what that will do is help keep up with growth. It will accommodate demographic shifts, especially aging populations, introducing new housing that seniors can downsize into, for example. It starts to make a dent in affordability issues at different levels, and then it also is responsive to many of the major new employment centers that we know are coming to the region over the next several years. So just a little more detail about some of the key indicators, some of the key findings in our process here. One, and we see this nationally, the region's population is growing older. So like many places, the fastest growing cohort in this region is the 65 plus population. And that means significant new housing options might be needed. Not everyone's going to move to a smaller unit ever or anytime soon, but even if a small portion of these folks start to look for downsizing options, there just aren't enough units. And we're not talking senior housing, institutional housing. We're talking smaller townhomes, smaller homes, lower maintenance, more accessible. There's a number of new options that need to be made available. One bright spot here too is that there's some growth in the 20 to 34 age group. So you are seeing a new generation move into the region. It's not just aging. A cost burden that 30% or more of or above 30% of your income. The pain there is really being felt at the lowest income levels. In some communities, that pain is spread across the income ladder. Here, it's most prevalent at the lower incomes. We know that. We have programs in place. We're working on that. But at least in the middle and higher incomes, it's not quite as prevalent. So there are a decent number of people that are able to find relatively affordable housing here compared to other communities in the country. So one thing we measure is what we call the affordability gap. So here we're comparing the median home price to what the median income could afford in the region. And to the extent that the blue line is above the orange line, a typical home is not affordable to a typical household. And with COVID, this line diverged everywhere across the country. In this region, the lines are coming closer together. The housing stock was getting more affordable, but we're starting to see some divergence again. So across the board, we're seeing that median income home buyers, this is on the ownership side, are having harder and harder time finding something they can afford, and that's building up a lot of pent-up pressure in the market, which we all, I think, are relatively familiar with. So in communicating some of this, so this is a glimpse at one of our social media cards. So we really want to break down some of these important points into bite-sized nuggets, as we call them, that can be shared, that can be understood by lay people, so they can really access this information in terms they understand. One important consideration is workforce housing. So by workforce, we mean the people that maybe make a middle range income and comprise those jobs that our economies and our communities really need to function. So here we characterize the median salaries, in this case, of teachers and firefighters living together, for example. It's not all one income households. If those folks were living together, could they afford the median home price? Not quite, but they can get close. But what we do see is they can afford to rent something that might be suitable for them. A typical nurse makes about $86,000 a year. They can afford about a $200,000 home. That's $77,000 short of the median price. So they're having a hard time finding housing. They could afford to rent. A paramedic, lower income, far short. They can afford about half the price of a typical median priced home, and they can also barely make the rent work. So you can start to see how this starts to impact the core of our economy, and how just regular people we all see around us all the time are having a harder and harder time making these ends meet with housing. A key driver, and this is a national trend, is the underproduction of housing over the past 10 or 20 years. We used to build tens of thousands of units a decade. It's not a foreign concept in the past. It's a different story in many ways now, but it's not unprecedented. And we need to dial up the production rate across the board, really, to start catching up. There's a real pent-up demand here. It's a national problem, but it's also showing up regionally. And what this starts to feel like, just at the household level, we interviewed a lot of people across the region, and people just describe feeling stuck where they are. even if they do own a home, they can't move into the home they would rather live into. They can't downsize. They can't move to a new community. They feel like they got that 3% interest rate and they're never going to let that go. And so that just ties up a bunch of housing where we used to have a much more transaction. Now things are getting backed up, and it leads to not enough choices for the next round of folks, the next round of first-time home buyers that are looking for something. And then that combined with an overall shortage, you can see how we get a bit of a perfect storm here that's really tying up, locking up our housing stock and creating real problems. We looked at some of the new job centers coming online in St. Joe County and elsewhere. And this is going to create even more demand for housing. It might not be quite as acute as some people fear. There are thousands of new jobs projected, but that's within the context of an economy with hundreds of thousands of jobs. Nevertheless, it can have impacts locally. And we do, if we want to keep jobs coming, we need to keep building the types of housing that those employees are looking for, those executives, those workforce. So it always needs to be a conversation where we're talking about housing and jobs together at the regional level and also locally where those jobs are landing. So there's additionally some shifts in demographics, lifestyle trends, values with regard to where people want to live. And this lends itself to needing more housing units that might, for example, be roommate ready. People are waiting longer to get married, to have kids. They need to live in a more flexible environment longer. Multi-generational households too are more prevalent, where you can have 2 or 3 generations living together. Does the housing stock accommodate that? Are there those smaller units for downsizing seniors? Downtown living, of course, is very popular and is a good way to bring downtown economies back to life. Alternative transportation, can people live car-free, car-light? It's kind of an indirect subsidy for their lifestyle too, if they could eliminate a car from their household balance sheet. And green building, can we make more efficient buildings, more efficient homes that aren't as costly to operate? So finally, I'll just run through some of the key findings at a high level. They're described in more detail in the report. We need more diverse housing types. We've been building a lot of single family homes. This isn't to say that we don't ever need another single family home, but we need to rebalance the mix and see more larger multifamily, more medium-sized multifamily, more townhomes, more attached, just a more diversity that is also suitable for different contexts within the region. So there's suburban, there's village center, there's downtown. So across the board, and this is ownership and rental. We just need to see more diversity to reflect a more diverse community, more diverse households than we may have had in the past. So we have a strategy toolkit that starts with just a range of policy ideas that are tailored to the region, but generic enough that different communities could adapt them to their what makes their local communities unique. These address things like administrative capacity. We talk with MACOG about centralizing some of the important data that we need to have to understand and measure housing trends moving forward. With some limitations when we were trying to do our study, for example. New financing tools, new approaches to infill development, a really strategic approach to infrastructure investment. So we're getting as much as we can in those very precious investments from an economic development and also housing standpoint. This is a great forum to talk about regional coordination, and there are many opportunities for regulatory improvement, both at the local level, such as by streamlining zoning, and also coordinating regulations between places so it's easier for developers to operate in more communities and we get more investment, more widespread. So a couple of the ideas, gap financing is a typical one where the typical construction cost would lead to a rent or a sale price that's not affordable to the people we're trying to help, the middle class. So the affordability gap needs to be filled by some kind of institutional support. One takeaway here is that we should consider the return on the ROI, if you will, of this gap financing. You can spend a lot of money to build one unit for someone who needs a ton of support, but there's a lot of need in the middle class where you might not need such a massive gap filler to get a unit built. And that might allow us to yield more units for more people because generally there's more support at the market rate end and at the very low end, the tax credits and public housing. And there just aren't that many programs right now that operate in the middle spectrum. So we need to introduce some regional strategies to support that. James alluded to one. Hopefully we get some good news at some point about the regional land bank, that programs like that can help at a regional scale take vacant properties within communities and also help suburban and rural places find good use for their land, and tie not just the land itself, but also introduce some revolving, ideally, financing. So you can start to fill those gaps on a revolving basis, get more and more people into homes that they can own and build equity in, and then rinse and repeat, hopefully. So the study concludes with an implementation plan. This is focused on what MACOG is going to do next, and also the community foundations too. So if the strategy toolkit is offered to the municipalities and the counties, this is MACOG's homework for itself. So move forward with that land bank idea. We talked about the housing database, RDA housing initiatives, build more technical assistance, technical support resources. The community foundation can make housing more of a priority in ways that work for each of their counties. Keep the regional housing dialogue going and build administrative capacity at the MACOG level too, to help support especially the smaller communities that can't add a bunch of staff necessarily to pursue these issues on their own. And that does it for the very quick overview. James, anything else that would be important for me to cover, or any questions from the room?
It's a great high-level kind of summary of the overall study and kind of the findings and direction. I would be curious if folks have any questions for either MACOG or for the community scale staff.
I do. It's a nationwide problem. Where do we track as far as that, the gap for affordability and versus more of a nationwide average on that? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know if we did benchmarking work of, say, like, how bad is our affordability problem compared to, like, you know, ours compared to, like, I don't have the data in front of me, but if I was taking guesses, ours compared to San Francisco, we're not as bad, right? Ours compared to Grand Rapids, I don't know. I would really have to take a look at it. Jeff, I don't know if there was anything in terms of, like, your experience working with folks across the nation or data points that I'm just not recalling.
Sure. And Nels, you can jump in if you got a better memory than me, but I can say we did some similar work in the Indianapolis region recently, and the gap is larger in most other places, especially just on the amount, the number of dollars. The gap is larger in other places. It's a lot larger in the coastal communities, but it's also larger in New England where we work. Kentucky might be comparable, Nels, where we've worked out there. But I mean, at the same time, the MACOG region, I mean, the Northern Indiana region has slightly lower wages than these places. Property values are lower. You know, as a percent of the total value of homes, it might be pretty high still. I mean, it's an interesting question. Depending on how you look at it, it's either not such bad news or it's just as bad as everywhere else. But it's just that I think there is more to work with. The gap is not nearly as pronounced and unsurmountable as it is in other places. So it's not just bad news here.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, I would.
So this study focuses a lot on affordability and attainability for a certain class and income class. It seemed from this, did we look at availability across all classes and how we compare? And I just missed it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were looking at median income 120% above, like the 120% down all the way to area median income of less than 30%. So we're looking at all income levels.
Above and below the.
Yeah, it's just the most cost burden challenge is typically in the middle class or lower income.
Well, that's
where you're talking about the median income of 60 to 80 is really that really challenging area, as well as then, or 30 or lower, like in that category, extremely challenging.
Well, monetary policy has a lot to do with that too, because you have a lot of people that are sitting in homes with very low interest rates that would typically be moving up in size. Mm-hmm. And just the cost of exchanging house for house is prohibitive. Forget about going bigger.
Yeah.
So,
and that's kind of that
it's wrapped in
overarching sentiment where we kind of said, like, people feel like they're stuck because, like, am I going to take a 7% interest rate now?
Right.
Or am I going to keep my,
3%,
you know, 3% or 2%, right? Like, you know, so.
Well, and James, would it be fair to say that based on the aging population, the need for volume of housing that fits different income levels and the cost of infrastructure, I would say, although that wasn't hit on very hard in this.
Sure.
That density seems to be a big part of the proposed solution. And it's probably a shift in what the desirable home looks like for people at those different income levels. And at one point in time, maybe still today, someplace like Granger is a desirable place in a lot of people's minds. You know, you've got these plotted neighborhoods and things of that nature. But if we were to plop another Granger down in the west side of St. Joe County to accommodate the growth in the IEC development and stuff like that, that presents a whole different set of problems from a water, wastewater, utility, and land use perspective that, you know, I don't want to make a statement here so much as like ask, is density a significant part of the solution?
I think density is a significant part of the solution. It's not to say that we're saying that, you know, single family homes aren't a strategy. I think there are definitely still needs in the single family home kind of category, but that just there is a need for a higher variety of housing options, right? And when you start
stabilizing and supporting the existing single family housing stock, some of that comes offline every year, right?
Right.
Aging homes, crumbling homes. I don't think we're going to face, I hope we don't face the need that was seen a decade ago with the, 1,000 homes in 1,000 days, right? Where we're tearing a lot of that down because it's not viable. But, we're going to need to support the utility needs of a Granger to ensure that that housing stock is still viable, no different than maybe an aging housing stock in Elkhart, Goshen, Mishawaka, Warsaw, right?
And that's why one of the primary strategies that did come out of the original study that we put forth to Lily is looking at the land bank side of things, being able to look at our vacant and abandoned properties and be able to get those back into positive reuse, right? That's really the job of a land bank. And so I don't think that will solve the challenge, immediately. It's not a silver bullet, but there are going to be a series of things that need to be done. It's not just one solution, right? So it's being able to look at our vacant and abandoned properties, being able to infill those, right? Being able to provide a variety of housing options, really being able to look at how you can make it more attainable for that 60 to 80% AMI, that kind of area, right? Like, I think it's a suite and series of options that there's not just one overarching, and you should do this one thing and that'll solve it all. Because it's a very large challenge. It's a series of interconnected challenges, right? Like, as you use Granger as an example, Granger in the last census has showed to age and did not grow for the first time in a very long time, right? Like, and what it was showing in our look at it is that folks are holding on to those houses. They have maybe aged and might not need that house like they did 10 years ago, but they haven't moved out of that house because they either haven't found another option, their interest rate or whatever, they feel stuck in that location, right? You're not seeing that turnover. That's making it then more challenging for the next person who wants to move into that next house, right? That next step up to find something that's the next thing for them, which then is creating a backlog of who can buy a first-time house because people aren't moving out of the, right? Like, it's a series of interconnected challenges. And so, yeah, I think there's a variety of options and strategies that we're trying to put forth.
Hey, James. There was a slide that projected, I think it was on his comments as well, projected that 65 and over demo getting larger. And that actually figures into the financial expression of what the affordability is going to be at that level as well. And so I'm thinking about how quickly is that escalating? And I don't know how much you dove into demos or not, but that literally creates some of the I guess the way in which this movement occurs, because they stay in their homes, right? Or try to. And with that said, the affordability pieces can't be fixed. So I'm thinking, how quickly is that growing? One question. The other question I have is around the filter around counties. And did you break this out?
There is county by county report.
County by county breakdown.
Yes. Yeah. the information we presented here today is for the region, the 3-county region. There are individual data points and reports for each county. Yes.
And that's been completed.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, you can find that online, and I can make sure that you all have that.
Wonderful. So, and then the first question.
I don't recall how fast it is growing. I mean, I know we have it over a time period, and Jeff or the folks at Community Scale might be able to answer that. I don't know that I would have a great answer for you today, but it's definitely an area that we need to look more into.
We've seen faster growth rates in other places. So it's not growing at a unmanageable rate, perhaps, at least compared to other places, but it is growing and growing. And you're right that people, especially as they retire, shift to a fixed income, are going to feel more and more locked into the home, and they might not have an interest payment anymore, but they have a tax bill, and the taxes might be going up while they have their fixed income might not be. So there's strategies needed to help people age in place, as it were. For people who want to, it's the best way to go. You can help them, you can adapt their house, you can retrofit it, make it more accessible. That can be low-hanging fruit compared to the cost of trying to build something new for that person. So I think more and more we need to be sensitive to those issues and really get in our communities and figure out where those needs are.
Well, the other piece is that those folks from an elected official standpoint are the voters.
Mm-hmm.
Voting. So their voices are felt a lot louder than some of the others that we may be trying to attract into our community. And so with that said, it's just a dynamic that we need to pay attention to.
And if there's a strategy that says, well, gosh, you've lived in your home, you've raised your family, you've paid off your mortgage, you live here. Yeah, maybe it's 4 bedrooms, a little bit too big for you, but you really need to downsize to a smaller home. Good luck with that message.
No, yeah.
Well, you've also had the anomaly of the COVID, where it came in and housing cost of materials skyrocketed, and you have a sequence of timing where you stop building new houses here where you don't feel it for a couple of years because of that bubble. I'm not sure what's happened.
And I might also add, in our region specifically, how many lakes are there where people have a second house that they have partial occupancy and that are taking in, I mean, it's all and. It's definitely an all and situation.
But the other part of it too is, I think, from what I've read demographically, a lot of the younger people today aren't looking for the big houses that maybe we had wanted. So that feeds into the density issue, which feeds into the infrastructure support needed for sewers and water. And you're right. There's a lot of different things that feed into this.
I'll say it's not that we don't want them, we can't afford them. I'm glad to have the discussion and get some of these other factors on the table. For us, our population has hardly grown in the last 20 years. And so it feels in Marshall County like our housing shortage is outpacing the growth of our population. And so it's good to consider some of these other factors. I've had a lot of folks say that they're afraid our census data isn't accurate, and that one of the contributing factors may be a lot of folks in the area that just aren't reporting their presence, and that's a part of the the contribution to shortages as well. So
I'd like to get a profile of developers. We have a lot of house repair services, and they're all very, very busy, but we don't have developers building houses. If I had a crew of 12 people, I could keep them busy for the next decade if I had the money and the resources, but we seem to have a reluctance to jump in. The 4th District is a great example of a lot of vacant land. And we've done our study with Notre Dame, and it shows that we need 600 to 1,200. The numbers are right there, but nobody seems to be believing them enough to invest. And you're right, materials have really hampered a lot of the growth, but cost of labor, I'd like to see that continue to go up, because that's an attraction for whether it be a labor or a union job or just in general. We need to pay people more. The pay levels are a little strange, but to get a developer like we did in the 60s and 70s,
we couldn't build houses fast enough. When I lived in Fort Wayne, it was sprawl city, north, south, and to the west. And, I mean, they were just, we've still got a lot of space, but nobody seems to be wanting to build a nice new starter home. Well, that's the issue is I see specifically in the Elkhart area where I live. Yeah. Where you see a lot of these developments going up, but they're more on the high end of the scale.
I was gonna say, it's really hard to build a $160,000 home.
They're targeting.
Right? You can't do it. Yes, right.
X number of resources to build homes, and it's more financially viable for them to build expensive homes.
Yeah.
Because they know they're gonna turn and.
And I will say, like, working through the study, we did a lot of interviews with developers of a variety of housing types. And one of the things that I think even they were willing to admit is some of them get very comfortable working in certain communities. They have, they know the process, right? They know the procedures. They're not necessarily fully aware of all of those development opportunities that are out there, but they're comfortable doing the developments where they have done them, right? And so I do think there is an element of introducing developers to those other opportunities.
Yeah. Well, whether it's county or whether it's city, I think those developers have to get relationships with the code enforcement people and the planners of the city and the county, and we really have to plan our cities and developing into the county better, have that better relationship to make it a more green and embraceable type expansion, because we just can't have the sprawl. But something's got to give. Because we can't go a couple, 3 more years without building 1,000 houses in Elkhart County. We need.
How many,
Aerial
I
cycle
mean,
works. Yeah.
right, well, not Ariel, Cherry Creek, you guys have
Cherry
other
Creek, yeah.
developments. I mean, we're
Oh, yeah.
making strides.
Yep.
I don't want this picture to say that we're without hope. I think what this does is it absolutely says we need to be intentional and targeted and address some of the problems that we have. And we've all made some strides. If we get this grant, this is really going to send us over and give us the opportunity to focus on some infilling and some organized approaches on top of what we already have going.
And perhaps some policy log jams like off-street parking requirements and things of that nature that may otherwise, or frontage requirements that may otherwise be an inhibitor to the type of development that needs to happen, or drives the development that is happening to be more expensive than we intend it to be.
And I am mindful of time. And so this is a great conversation. I look forward to having more of these conversations with you all as we await kind of information from Lily to see if we can kind of turbocharge some of those housing initiatives. So.
Apologies.
Absolutely. Next, we do have a presentation. We wanted to make sure that you are aware of the recent updates from the Propel US 30 and US 31. Those studies have been ongoing and are kind of nearing a conclusion, but we wanted to make sure that you knew of the recent level 3 alternatives report that has been published. And so we do have the Propel team folks here for the US 30 East and US 30 West, which one of those also covers US 31, and wanted to make sure that you all had some time to be fully aware of those alternatives. So I'll turn it over to you all to take us away.
Thank you. My name is Scott Sandstrom. I'm with CDM Smith. I'm the project manager for the US 30 West Propel study. I'm working with MDOT.
And I'm Brian Capalla. I'm with WST, and I'm here representing the US 30 East.
So today we're just going to give you a briefing on where we're at with the alternatives analysis, particularly the level 3 alternatives. So as a refresher, the Propel US 30 and 31 studies cover approximately 180 miles along US 30 and 31. We'll be focusing on the US 30 section, but as James said, there is a section of 31 in the 30 West study, which starts at State Road 49 in Porter County and goes to Beach Road in Marshall County. That's where 30 East picks up, goes all the way to the Ohio State line and accepting the Fort Wayne area, and then along 31 down to County Road 700 in Fulton County. As part of this process, our study team has been engaging the public and study stakeholders for the last 2 years, and the feedback continues to be a vital part of the success of the study, and it will help and inform and guide the next 20 plus years of transportation investments in the corridor. We don't anticipate that the Propel studies will identify or recommend a single build alternative at the end of the study. Instead, it'll create a reasonable set of alternatives that could move forward as part of NDOT's regular call for projects, which is typically a 5-year period process. So here's the schedule. We started in 2022. We're now here towards the end, at the end of 2024 with the level 3 analysis. And we hope to finish the study early next year. Just a brief summary of the analysis we did, the alternatives analysis. We started with level 1, also known as the universe of alternatives. We looked at 55 different potential concepts along the corridor and narrowed those down. We published that report in November of 2023 and took comments. And then we worked on level 2. In this particular level of analysis, we looked at primary intersections, which were those intersections deemed major collector and above. We looked at potential improvement to those specific locations, and that report also was published and public comment was received. And now we're at the point of the level 3 screening report, where we evaluated the improvement packages in the planning segments. Improvement packages are basically the alternatives. And we looked at the primary intersections, the secondary intersections, and also the roadway sections in between them. We'll talk more about that today together. So this is the 8 steps that we looked at in the level 3 screening process. We started with defining planning segments in each corridor, and we moved through identifying improvement packages, then evaluating those and providing a rating for each of those with our draft level 3 screening reports that are published. So what are planning segments? This map shows the US 30 West corridor. There's 15 planning segments in the 30 West corridor. And a segment basically is just a section of roadway that functions as a system to provide access and mobility within a geographic area. So we looked at how intersections function together to provide access to adjacent land. Where's the land use change? What intersection would influence others if there was an improvement? Those type of things to kind of determine a digestible chunk of the corridor to look at for the planning segments. Here's the 30 East. They have 13 segments themselves across their 60-mile study area. And the 30 West study area is about 66 miles, I believe. So together, they do encompass about 120 miles of the 180 total studies. So after we identified the planning segments, we looked at the improvement packages. An improvement package is a combination of intersection improvements and facility type, which together act as an alternative for the segment. So you can think of them as alternatives. And there's multiple improvement packages developed for each planning segment. So to develop these, we looked at first the influence of intersection concepts on adjacent intersections. For example, if we had an interchange at one location, that may impact what could happen at the adjacent intersections. We also took into account access management principles, which included driveway improvements and recommendations of spacing and median openings. We looked at secondary intersections in level 3. So that paired with the primary intersections, we looked at level 2. And access management principles were considered to align the improvement to intersections along the corridor with appropriate access. And we also looked at, in general, when there was interchanges involved, we also followed NDOT's preferred minimum spacing for those, which is 3 miles, for instance, in a rural area. So a major consideration in the creation of the improvement packages was the level of access management. The graphic on this slide is an illustration of how the balance between mobility and access occurs with the different facility type. So as you can see, those with full access here on the bottom right can have lower levels of mobility due to more traffic entering and exiting, which can lead to turbulence in the traffic. And then higher order roadways like expressways, freeways, even major arterials have a higher degree of access control to preserve the greater mobility. So to better align the corridor mobility access within the corridors, it's necessary to apply some level of access management improvements in conjunction with the intersection treatments. Within this study area, both of our study areas, US 30 and 31 are classified as major arterial roadways. So as shown in this graphic, a major arterial typically has more mobility and less access than other facility types. Also, in both of our study areas, there are a number of driveways, many of which do not meet NDOT's access management guidelines currently. But while these driveways are important for access, they can impact safety and operations of the roadway. So the challenge is to provide safety improvements, which sometimes reduce or may eliminate this access, but also do provide sufficient access across into US 30 and 31. I'll transition to Brian here. He's going to talk more about how we evaluated the improvement packages.
Yeah, thank you. So the evaluation of improvement packages considered 4 criteria: safety, mobility, impacts, and cost. For safety improvements, the packages we're evaluating for the identification of conflict points. And these are areas where vehicle paths cross at driveways, intersections, and interchanges. Reducing conflict points is the key to enhancing safety, as minimizing conflict points lowers crash risk. With respect to mobility, we looked at things such as access and crossing point spacing, local travel delay, changes in travel time along US 30, and driveway access. Each package was also reviewed against known environmental constraints to assess impacts. The identified impacts from level 3 are estimated direct permanent impacts. There may be other construction-related impacts that involve temporary or short-term changes, but those were beyond the scope of the study. The potential impacts as presented in the level 3 report are considered preliminary and reflect a conceptual level of design. More detailed design and evaluation typically occurs part of the NEPA process, and that occurs during INDOT's traditional project development process for projects that use federal funds or require federal approvals. And finally, planning level costs were estimated for each package. Those costs will change as more detail becomes available. However, these estimates do provide a way to compare the relative costs between packages. So after completing the level 3 analysis, each improvement package was rated using the following 3 terms. First was eliminated, which means that they were considered unreasonable due to limited benefits compared to impacts and or costs. These will not be further evaluated and would likely not warrant consideration as part of a NEPA study. Some packages were also carried forward, which means that in comparison to other packages, they were considered to have marginal benefits. They may also have higher costs and higher impacts. They will continue to be considered in future studies, but may need additional analysis to determine if they are a reasonable solution to the planning segment's needs. And finally, other packages were recommended, which means they were considered reasonable and feasible among the best meeting the needs of the planning segment with limited impacts and without extraordinarily high costs. Those will be continue to be included in our study and will likely warrant consideration in future NEPA studies. So a stated goal of the Pell process is to identify a range of reasonable alternatives. So at this time, no decisions have been made about the future of US 30, and no projects related to this study have been funded by INDOT. Given the needs identified within the study areas, reasonable alternatives could consist of improvements at a single intersection, and it could also consist of improvements at multiple intersections and or the roadway sections in between those intersections. Depending on multiple factors, including statewide priorities and available funding, improvements considered as part of this study could be combined in different ways to address the transportation needs and support the goals of the study areas. So I just want to walk through an example of one of our planning segments that's in the report, and this is an example of a table for the US 30 East planning segment 4, which is in Warsaw. The top row here represents what we call the no build option, which basically leaves all the intersections as they are today, and this will be the top line of every segment. Will represent the no build or the no build option. Below that, the segments are listed in order of level of access by facility type. And at the bottom row, arterial facilities with more access are listed first, while full freeway facilities with limited access are listed at the bottom. In between are expressway facility types, which eliminate stopping conditions along US 30 while providing some access at intersections and driveways. But one item we wanted to point out specifically was the expressway light facility type, and this was developed in response to public input during the study process. After considering those comments, INDOT developed the expressway light facility to combine driveway access aspects of an arterial facility with the increased access management of an expressway. So unlike an expressway's light facility would allow right-in, right-out access at driveways, and it would also include median U-turn openings at select locations to reduce how far drivers would need to travel when turning movements are limited to right-in, right-out access. It is important to note that these packages are not the only combinations of improvements that could be considered in future NEPA studies. It is possible that improvement packages could be mixed and matched across planning segments in the future. So just regarding some of our public involvement surrounding the level 3 report rollout, since the study began in 2022, each study team has been holding monthly community office hours events to engage and inform the public as the study has progressed. These are typically held twice a month in locations within the study areas and provide an opportunity for people to view current documents, communicate and interact directly with study team members, ask questions, and provide feedback. Since the level 3 reports were published on November 12th, several of these events have been held, including these in the US 30 West study area. And these are the events for the US 30 East study area. I will point out that the last December office hours is tomorrow for the US 30 East area and here in New Haven. All teams are currently scheduling office hour events for January. Those are yet to be scheduled, but once they are, they'll be advertised on our public website and through our social media accounts. And for those who would prefer to read a physical copy of the report, hard copies of these reports were made available at several public locations within each study area. And this is the listing of the 11 or so locations for the US 30 West study area. And these are the locations for the US 30 East study area. At these locations, QR codes were also provided that could be snapped by a phone or a tablet that would direct folks directly to our website and to an online comment form. And finally, we have our website for those who are comfortable reviewing the documents online. The full report is available on our website, propelus30.com. There you can access a virtual public meeting, which has a recording of the public meeting presentation that was given last month. Also, there's an interactive map that includes where you can fly around the map and access our interactive our fly-through videos, which are narrated and explain the various concepts that were packages that were either recommended or carried forward. They're very highly recommend you take a look at those. I think they're very informative and provide kind of a visual representation of what those icons were you saw in that previous exhibit. And again, the comments can be easily submitted via our website. And I want to note that our formal comment period for level 3 ends this Friday on December 13th. And with that, that concludes our short presentation on the US 30 health study. So yeah, if there's any questions.
And with the level 3 coming out just right after or during our policy board meeting in November, we wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to be able to hear kind of where the level 3 alternatives report was at. And obviously, whether you're in Plymouth or Marshall County or Kosciuszko County or Warsaw or a regular driver on a really critical freeway throughout kind of east-west movement in our region, wanted to make sure that you all were aware that that comment period is still open. I know a number of you are working on comments to be submitted by Friday, right? But didn't know if folks had questions for the study team. Just wanted to be able to make sure that we got this in front of you so that you're up to speed on where it's at.
You know, I've spent a fair amount of time on the website. Those fly-through videos are very helpful. If you've not been on there, I'd encourage you to do that because there's a lot of good information on there. It's just a matter of what projects actually come to fruition. So, thank you for coming in today. Appreciate your efforts on that.
Just got a question. So this is great information and I'm gonna get on the site. And I drove it back in September. I decided I was in Fort Wayne and I decided to drive it from Fort Wayne all the way to 31. Wow, traffic. Wow. I'm just curious, where does this go? Where does this go? How do we turn it into funding? How do we turn it into an action step to where we can change some of these pressure points?
Yeah, so as of now, the plan is for when the study is complete, it'll be passed to the districts at that point. And so as their typical scoping project, they'll have all this information and they'll be able to look and see what should happen at potentially individual locations or larger stretches. And that's the plan right now, as far as we've been told.
Well, can it be, I don't know how you present it, but it needs to go into a financial support position. Does that help with the federal dollars that could be appropriated? Are you going to be able to make a presentation to the congressman or whoever it's appropriate to?
So this will, so from an NDOT perspective, this is gonna feature decision. So, you know, the best way I can kind of sum it up is when we look at these corridor studies, it gives us a range of options that helps us to, instead of piecemealing it one at a time, tells us what kind of options we can possibly do. And then once we make our decisions on what we're going to do and put it in the program, it helps us to easier argue why we chose that.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, you know, that there's nothing set in stone right now. Once the Pell study is done and we see a new administration coming in as well, and we see where our priorities lie. So really nothing at this moment I can really say is where we're going forward yet, but we see the priority and the need.
We've got such volume on 31 and 30 that we've got to be able to make it safer. You know, it's so important to our commerce around here to put some money into the safety part of it and move this forward.
I'd also encourage you to get onto the US 30 Coalition website. I mean, because it talks a lot about what you're, you know, economic, a lot of those things we're really trying to drive home there. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of different opportunities, but I think it's going to come down to, you know, as a community or as a region, we've got to really solicit our state representatives and senators to get the funding we need to be able to figure out a way to make these things happen.
So this will help NDOT generate a 5-year plan, right?
It'll be part of their plan.
You'll be looking at, are you within that?
Yes, I'm within that. So I know that. That's all right. So I'm deputy commissioner for the Fort district, so that would be the west side of things. So, but ultimately, you know, I can speak for obviously both sides of the Fort Wayne district and the Fort district. Ultimately, there isn't funding in place to put any of this stuff in right now. Once the PL study is done, we'll reevaluate where we're going. But we definitely see the need.
The question is, how much input will related to MACOG? How much input do we get when you're making these decisions or along the process?
Well, so being frank and not disrespectfully, I've received lots of input over the years. I continue to do so. So I'm well aware, and obviously I have my own strong opinions on what needs to be done. The problem is weighing what can we do from a funding aspect. Also, bears mentioning too, one of the things we've heard on this Propel study from the stakeholders, the people who come to these meetings, we've heard a lot about access and their real concerns. So while we have this one side saying we want a freeway, the other side saying what somewhere in between, the public also, and I'm not saying one way or the other where NDOT is leaning, I'm just putting it out there too. There's a strong contingent of folks that say, don't limit my access too. So lots of things to discover. I
can't have it both ways.
More important than anything else, we want things to be safer. And so we're going to work toward that.
Okay, I know we're kind of way past time here.
Yeah, thank you.
So appreciate
Thank you for coming in. Since we are a little over on time, I'm going to run through the staff updates real quick. Community Crossings matching grant call for projects that round 1 closes January 31st. They still have that option to go after, I think it's 1.5 million. So please take a look at that. That increased limit has definitely benefited our region. MACOG call for projects that closed this last month or so. We received a number of applications. We're going through and vetting that for the South Bend urban as well as the Elkhart urbanized areas, looking through those. We'll have some recommendations for projects to present probably in January for funding consideration. Safety action plan, as mentioned a few times throughout today, we have a meeting today at Chicory at 1 o'clock to go through with the task force where the safety action plan's at and present some information related to that. So if your technical staff is coming, great. If you would like to come, even better. Our quarterly tracking review, that's where we review all of our projects that are federally funded with local governments. That'll be on January 15th. And then last but not least, as Debbie mentioned in the financial report, you saw some outlays for some new vehicles. We have received 3 of our new flyers, those new vehicles. So that takes us up to 7 vehicles in the fleet that are basically brand new. That concludes the quick version of the staff update to try and get us moving towards adjournment.
Okay. Privilege of the floor. Anybody have anything they need to bring to the group? Hearing none. How about public comment? Anything online? Zach, anything
I have nothing online.
Okay.
Except ahead of time.
from the group? Okay, with that, look for a motion to adjourn.
So.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you all for your patience.
So,
Yep, absolutely. Those are all the items for you to sign. How did your